Wondering what the F has happened to your body and your life? You're in the right place, my friend. Welcome to Season 3 of Transforming 45, where we dive into the incredible stories of how brilliant humans are navigating the midlife squeeze with courage, passion, and a healthy dose of humor. Don't miss out on any of our heart-led episodes. Hit the subscribe button, leave a 5-star review, and if you're inspired, share an episode you love with a friend. It means more to me than I can express that you're choosing to spend time here and sharing our message of midlife revolution. So let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This week, I am thrilled to welcome back Anke Johnson. We recorded about a year ago. And so I was going through a thought process of maybe I wouldn't ask my first question because she answered that question a year ago. And then I realized, but that's the entire point of the question, is for us to think through how we are evolving in our journeys. And a lot has happened in both of our worlds in the last year. So Anke Johnson is a functional nutritionist and coach. In our last conversation, we went all over the place, from the great big macro down to the micro of mitochondria and cells, which I love that part of the conversation. And we're going to be revisiting that part. So Anke, welcome back to the show. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you, Lisa. And I am thrilled to be here. And this is actually a three-peat because of our lives last year. This is the third time's a charm where we actually are getting back together. So the timing is perfect.
Yes, absolutely, as it always is. Okay, so we are going to start with that first question. So Anke, who are you and how did life introduce you to this version?
You know, that's such a wonderful question. And I am one who is never short of words. So I think I'm going to be very careful in answering this and not getting too all over the place. But I think one of the biggest things is that I am now allowing for life to flow, even when it is completely off plan or off track from what it is that I thought I was going to be doing. And if I think back in my younger years, if I think back to those years, I was always the type of person who I would say was very impulsive and also impatient. And if I had a plan, I've got that engineering brain. So if I had a plan, it was left-brained, it was linear, it was analytical, and if it went off track, it was really difficult for me just to allow whatever to happen. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that's shifted for me is now I am allowing for the flow. And most of the time, if it doesn't feel horrible, if it doesn't feel wrong, whatever's happening, then I really just kind of go with it and trust in the process. And I think if I had to wrap it up, I now trust with faith. And so faith doesn't necessarily mean from a from a religious sense. It means just faith in whatever the process is. It's bringing me to something that I'm supposed to be doing or facilitating or connecting. And of course, especially with that comes all of the wellness and the health and healing that I know is my purpose here. So that's where I'm at.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I was just listening back to our episode this morning and our episode from last year. And it's so interesting how different your answer is this year than it was last year. I mean, there are elements of it that are similar, but at the same time, it's like ideas that you were expressing this time last year have coalesced and come together.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that is the power of this question and why I wanted to continue to ask it, even though you've answered it before, because this life that we're living is this constant phase of evolution. And one of the questions I asked you in our last conversation was, what if we shifted the framework of healing from a destination to a journey? And I think that your answer to this question shows that it is a journey. There is no destination, and that there's like healed is never in the past tense. It's like it is a constant process of healing and moving.
Yeah.
So thank you for engaging in that experiment with me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I do not remember what I said. I did not listen to our recordings. Now, of course, I'm going to have to go back and listen to it and see what it was that I said. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting that you brought up the word faith because it's something that also has been sort of weaving its way back into my fabric in a way that it hasn't for a really long time. So we were just having the conversation. Listeners of this podcast know I just went through every single midlife transformation or transition you could have within a 4 month period. And there were times of that that were very challenging. I
Yeah.
had lots of moments of like sitting at my desk, screaming at the universe, right?
Mm.
Asking why all of this was happening at the same time and why everything has to be so damn hard.
Yeah.
And at the same time, everything was working out. It just wasn't happening in my timeline. It was happening in the larger timeline. And faith is one of the lessons that I took from that time.
Mm.
And that, and like you said, it doesn't have to be religious. It can be faith in whatever your grounding is,
Yeah.
but that faith in knowing this is hard and it will be okay. It's part of that story of evolution and healing.
You know, I'm going to take something that I was a late bloomer mom. So, I had my son when I was 39. I was almost 40. He's 22 now. So, or almost 22, which is just bizarre to me. Anyway, but I remember being with these groups of moms, and all these moms were easily 20 years, 10, 20 years younger than I was. And so the fitting in to the fabric of that was like not good. I didn't feel like I fit in very well. And collaboration and connection has always been very important to me. So I felt very disconnected in that time of my life. But there was this one mom who was fabulous. And my son is high ADHD. And so, all these other moms had these little babies who were just sitting in the one little area and doing their thing and being quiet, and the moms could talk. And I was sitting there wrestling after my son, who was just like everywhere. And so she said to me, she said, the really cool thing is that for all of our kids, there's going to be a day where they're no longer in diapers. And I was like, yeah. And she said, so just like in this present moment, you're running after your kid and you're feeling because I had shared with her, and you're feeling disconnected. She said, just remember that at some point your son is going to be out of diapers. And so this moment is also going to be out of diapers at some point. And that advice 20 years ago is like the best. It wasn't even advice. That statement was something that was so profound for me. And I feel like that is what has helped me in my past year of shifts and changes. So I know I haven't had as many shifts and changes as you have, but they've also been these big life changes that is what has helped me to move through it. And when I first thought of the words trust with faith, it wasn't with faith, it was trust and faith. And I kept kind of noodling and going, there's something that's missing there. And then I realized it's trust with faith. So you have to have the faith in it in order to be able to fully trust in the process. So the diaper story it keeps coming back, but that is what helps me in those really difficult moments when I just feel like, the weight of the world is on my shoulders, and almost, this sounds really dramatic, but there's no out. That really helps. That really helps to get through whatever it is that I'm needing to get through, because I know that on the other side, whatever that other side is, again, no destination, it's the journey. Then I know that, it'll be just fine. And then I'll be faced with another challenge.
Yes. And I think that is a really important part to put into this conversation, because I've talked about this before on the show, but our brains are so programmed in Disneyfied in the happy ending. Like you go through a really hard time and then you have your happy ending. And that's a lie.
Yes, it is.
That was all full of shit. Thanks,
Yep.
Disney. And it's so powerfully constructed the way our brains see story. And so when we get through these places, I've had these conversations with people a lot around, well, I thought I healed that and I thought I was in a good place. And then there is this blanket of failure that we wrap around ourselves because it's like, I went through that hard time. I was feeling so much better. Then this thing happened, and now I have failed at my healing journey. We are so hard on ourselves.
Yep.
And that, like, it's that blanket of failure that is the illusion.
Yeah.
That it is that there is this, like, sorry, I'm using my hands for those of you who are listening, but that's peak of story. And then we come back down and and that's not the reality of life, because we do the work in ourselves, and life continues to happen
Yep.
all around us.
Yep.
So we are constantly in this negotiation with who we are, who we become, who we're becoming, and the context in which we are doing that. And so, it goes back to sort of that first question I asked you last year around what if we shifted the framework from destination to journey? And that's so important in relieving ourselves of this idea that there's some idealized perfect version of healed out there.
Well, and I think that brings me to something that I think I mentioned in our last podcast, because at that point, I think it wasn't quote unquote new to me, but it was more clear to me at that point, which again speaks to the evolution of everything, right? And that is that all of what we do is dynamic. None of this is static. And so one of the things that I share with people who I work with when they have challenges around the fact that they're not getting their happy ending, that's static. That's never going to happen. The only time that's going to happen is if you get your happy ending and then you take your last breath.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
It's the only time that's going to happen.
Cue the music.
You're right, exactly. But I always look at it as, a perspective of balance. So if you're physically balancing on a ball, you might find that sweet spot where you are in perfect balance with that ball. And you may have a moment, whatever that moment is, where you're not wobbling, you're not balancing, trying to, rebalance, but ultimately you're going to have to rebalance. And I kind of think of it not as a ball, but those half balls, those half exercise balls, Bosu balls. I think of it more like that. And so most people are looking for that center spot where they can just stay. But that's stagnation. We don't have that, and we don't grow there. Nothing happens there. And it's actually not a happy place. The happy place is all around the rebalancing constantly. And then maybe you find that little spot for a second, and then you go back out. And when you find that little spot, it's like, hooray, yay. And then you go back out and you learn more. And that, I think, again, if you think about the evolution from evolution, sounds very specific, but the shifting from last year to this year, that's something that I have really learned to celebrate more, because it allows you then to, in my world, grow so that you can be there for others as well with your strengths.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important kernel to sort of build the seed, to build the rest of this conversation around, because you and I both had big changes in our lives. And on a global scale, everything else has changed as well.
Yes.
I don't know that I've ever lived in a time where I have seen this much massive change happen in such a short period of time. And so, regardless of where you are on the spectrum of what you think, feel, believe, all of those things, there is this vibration on the planet that's happening.
Yep.
Because of the amount of change that is happening so quickly that quite literally impacts every person on this planet in this moment. And so I thought it could be really helpful for folks if we talked about what we can do to nourish ourselves so that we can continue to do this, like coming back in, caring for ourselves so that we can go back out into this intensely vibrating context that we are in a way that allows us to keep moving forward. So where could we start with that? What do we need to do to really nourish ourselves in this time?
Boy, that's a loaded question. So I think I love the fact that you're using the word vibration because that takes away right or wrong. So maybe that's the place to start. That this is yet another vibration in our lives that we are experiencing. And so it's in that experience, I think, like any other thing that we are exposed to, it's in that experience is how do we respond to that exposure? And that's one of the things that I'm seeing in a lot of my clients. So yes, I'm a functional nutritionist and I'm also a health and life coach. And so I look at things from the mind, body, spirit perspective. Now, the clients I've been working with and the clients coming to me are the focus, the main focus that they're looking at is this unrest and this anxiety around all of what is happening. And so the beautiful piece of that is that has prompted me to up my knowledge on what is anxiety, what's happening with the nervous system, what's going on with parasympathetic and sympathetic, how is that connected to the foods that we eat and things, all of those things, right? So kind of looking at that vessel that people would look into, that's important to know. But then, not by accident, Martha Beck, who is one of my I absolutely love her. She is a life coach and more, so much more, but has this huge library of books that she has written. And her latest, I believe it's her latest one. It's called Beyond Anxiety. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, I was listening to Martha Beck anywhere I could listen to her when she was on
Yep.
that launch. It was the medicine I needed
Yep.
because it was sort of early February when she
Right.
was out sharing this message.
Right. And so in Beyond Anxiety, what I love that she shares is she shares about how it really is our response to the world and how we respond to it that creates our own life expression. And I know I'm kind of getting a little deepy wooey
No.
here, but I think it's important. But it creates how then we express ourselves in life. And that circles right back to that helps me to flow. So I don't sometimes there are things, I get down to my office in the morning and the first thing I see is something that is really unsettling in the news or whatever. And instead of reacting to it, I respond to it in a way of flow. How important is this right now in this moment? Is it important for me to look at this and to respond to it differently? And I think that keeps you, I don't want to say the word safe because it's not being safe or unsafe. Keeps you, I'm going to come back to the balance. It keeps you balanced. It keeps you dynamically moving in a way that serves you best in that moment.
Yeah, I think that phrasing of dynamically moving is really helpful. So a conversation, I would imagine you're having it a lot in your world as well, is like, how much do I keep myself informed and how much do I disconnect so that I can continue to dynamically move forward? Right? Because this is how I see it. It is my responsibility to know and understand what is happening on this planet in the moment, at this moment, because I live here and I care about all of the other humans who are on this planet at the same time as I am. So I have some responsibility around knowing and understanding that. And I have responsibility to this human that I am living inside of.
Yep.
Caring for it and making sure that I am able to function in a way that is supportive and helpful in this time. And so when you started talking about like nervous system, I think this is a really good place to talk about that because it is possible to hold space for what's happening in the planet and hold space for ourselves at the same time. As humans, we have the capacity to do so. And then in order to do that, however, we have to be really intentional about how we are looking after ourselves and looking after and paying attention to that nervous system. In my own experience, this is how I do it. I have a news source that I listen to that I can get information and facts from that does not spark my nervous system. So that is how I do it. So I listen to that in the morning. And sometimes I'll start into a second podcast, but I've gotten good now at listening to my body. If it says, that's enough now, we're going to stop, time of quiet. So I listen to my body. I stop when that message starts coming from me, and then I tune into what does my nervous system need right now. And often the response is silence. You need some silence, you need some quiet, you need some nature, you need some grass under your feet. And then I tune in and do those things until I feel myself coming into a space where I can dynamically move forward. So I'd love for you to talk about what you see happen, like what is happening to our nervous systems when we are in this place of stress.
I think the best thing, instead of going into all the technology or the biology rather, and physiology of all of these things and saying, well, the parasympathetic nervous system, switches to sympathetic and then blah, blah. Instead of doing all of that, I think a clear picture that I think anybody can relate to is something that's been used many, many times. So if you look at a herd of horses, so prey animals, and I'm going to use horses because that's oftentimes what I use in my coaching. So as a lifelong equestrian and as a instructor of equestrians, what I've learned from the horses and continue to learn all the time is that when they so much live in the moment. And so they are doing what you and I have been describing, which is looking at a situation, balancing to that situation, and then moving forward to the next situation. And that can happen in a microsecond, that can happen in a minute, it can happen to an hour, it doesn't matter. But so if you see a herd of horses and something is there that they are wary of for their own self-preservation, they typically will run. Now, some horses will run, so that's the flight. Some horses will stay and fight. Some horses will freeze or faint. And some horses, and then freeze and faint. So I'll just leave it there. But so you have all of these different reactions, and this is in the same prey animal, right? So you've got part of the herd moving, but that's why you have a leader in the herd who, for the ones who are freezing and who are staying in danger, they move them along. They say, wake up, you need to move along first, and then we can look back and assess the situation. So I think we see that in that people will either fight, they'll run away, they'll freeze, or they'll faint, where they just become numb. And what you described is very similar to what happened to me as all of this started to change. This whole climate started to change. And what I actually had to do was something that it was very interesting. Somebody called me out on it and said, you're putting your head in the sand. So I basically had to completely tune out. So faint. I had to completely tune out and not listen to anything. And I used to be the type of person who every morning, 20 minutes, I would listen to a news source, a regular news source on the TV, just to see what was going on. And I had to stop that completely. I couldn't anymore. So allowing myself to be in that faint mode and allowing myself to stick my head in the sand, because that's what I had to do. When I came out, I was so much stronger for it. And I was able to ask certain people that I trusted, trust with faith, and said, what source are you listening to? Because I don't even know who to go to listen to now. What is actually happening? What is the truth? What's backed up without me having to spend 3 hours fact checking things, right? And so I got that information, and that information really helped me to understand where to go to. And so that is what I do as well. In the morning, I have two sources that I listen to, and I get the information. And just like you, I listen to what can my nervous system take in that moment, and where does it say stop? And when it says stop, I listen. And that's a big piece in parenting your parasympathetic nervous system. So that's how I remembered the difference between the anxiety or fight and flight or getting into the place where you don't feel safe. That is what's called the sympathetic nervous system. That's where you're running. That's where you're going away from danger. The parasympathetic nervous system is where you can parent the sympathetic, parasympathetic, and that's the safety place, if you will. And so that's where I encourage my clients to be able to find the difference between when do you find yourself in that sympathetic place, the unsafe place, where do you find yourself in the safer place, and how do you get there in the moment?
Yeah, and that's a key question. And I also want to, although so everyone's system is a little bit different, and so everyone's feelings will be slightly different. But
Yep.
what are some of the hallmarks of being in a place where we are anxious, where it's time to do some parenting? Like what are the actual physical things that you see in people that we feel that are the telltale signs of, okay, we need to stop here and we need to give ourselves some care.
Yeah, great question. So I think from a mental's perspective, it's when it becomes the dominant thought. The fear becomes the dominant thought, and you no longer can function and literally think about what it is that you might need to be thinking about, whether it's work or your family or driving the car or whatever. Right? It's where you lose that ability to feel. I'm trying not to use the word control because control is not a great word for this, but it's where you feel, I'm going to use the word balanced, where you feel balanced enough to be able to think and make decisions. And it's typically when you don't have that ability anymore, that's where you're finding yourself in that anxiety place. From a physiological standpoint, it's when you start to lose the control of certain systems in your body. So your digestive system will start to shut down. So are you becoming constipated? Are you becoming literally, do you have a lot of diarrhea? Are you not digesting properly? Are you getting heartburn? Are you burping a lot? Are you bloated? Those types of things are symptoms of what's happening in physiologically. The other big thing is stress creates, our bodies look at stress all the same. So whether you're getting married and you're super happy or you're at a funeral and you're crying, that stress is the exact same across the board. And so looking at how are you sleeping? How are you resting? How are you able to nurture yourself back into that place, like you said, where you need to get your feet in the grass and get into nature? Are you able to stop what you're doing and move into those places that re-energize you, that bring energy back to you? And if you're not, you're already on that little hamster wheel of stress and anxiety that's not allowing you to even recognize where you're at. Is that kind of what you were thinking?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. It's just giving people those sort of really specific anchors that they can hold on to when they start feeling, because, we were talking before about just like, I don't know that I've ever lived in a time that has been this much change this quickly.
Yeah.
And so people may be feeling things they've never felt before. And that unfamiliarity of like, what is this that I am feeling? Or they're just feeling it in a way that's more intense than they've ever felt it before.
Well, and if I can speak into this.
Yeah.
So the other big thing is, so a lot of people listening to this may think, well, this is all about the political climate that we're talking about, but there's a lot of things that are going on too. These changes, climate change, that affect us from literally a cellular perspective. So it's literally the water in our bodies is vibrating differently, which makes all of the cells vibrate differently. So if you're in an area, for example, in our area in Wisconsin, we have been in this really bad drought. And so it has changed all of the weather patterns. So this year we had almost no snow. And so there's all these different things that are happening. Last spring, not this spring, because of the drought, there were certain trees that didn't produce their usual seed pods or their pollens. So it's literally living in a world, you have this expectation of, well, the cottonwood trees, they do this and they drop these and da da da. And all of a sudden you look up and you go, wait a minute, why is nature even responding completely differently than what we expect? Now I'm afraid. Because if
Yes.
Mother Nature is responding differently, right?
Yeah. And that is why I didn't specifically say, why I just talked about this intense vibration, because it is all those things. And it's the unpredictability.
Yes.
Right? As humans, we are hardwired to like stasis,
Yes.
to like everything to be in along the patterns that we've always known and always understood. And in this time that we're in, all of those patterns are all over the place. All of the snow you didn't get, we got.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so we had an extremely intense winter. And in the place where I just lived, there was a brutal ice storm, like 36 hours of freezing rain. Areas, trees, generations of trees are gone. Humans who I know are still have been without power for an entire week. Like major devastation. And seeing all of these, yes, those storms have happened in the past, but it's the change in frequency and
Yeah.
intensity that is really unpredictable. And so it's our body's reaction to this unpredictability that I think is really important for us to start to really get to know and understand and tune into.
Yeah.
And for me, it always starts like in my solar plexus region. I start to feel this like motor start to go. It's like someone pushed on the gas pedal, but the brake is still on. And so there's this like feeling.
Yep. Yep.
And that for me is when that is my body's signal of like, okay, time for you to shift your whatever it is that you're doing right now, because we need to do some caring for ourselves or things are going to go sideways. Yeah. What are some of the tools that you provide people to help them deal with that, like the running motor or the overthinking brain or whatever their specific response is?
So this is where it's a beautiful question. I'm a huge believer, all of our bodies are very unique and we're also very, very powerful beings, each one of us. And so in that power and those strengths that we have, who am I to lead you in one direction and tell you to do a certain thing, a protocol? So what I like to do is I like to give people a framework in some kind of a story or some kind of a way that you can then tune in to what is going to be the best answer movement forward for you. So one of the places that I start, and I pulled this out here, is something from the Zen theory of change. And I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I'm not.
But I love this. This comes from a book from Rick Carson. The Zen theory of change is this: I free myself not by trying to be free, but by simply noticing how I am imprisoning myself in the very moment I am imprisoning myself. So the example that I give for people, and I read it over several times, because if you think about it, how often do we get faced with a situation and the first thing we do is struggle? If we struggle, that is an impulsive response, and it takes away, it brings us right into sympathetic. It brings us into a thinking pattern where it's the fight or flight. And when we're in that fight or flight right brain place, we cannot go into our left brain and think about, what do we do in this situation? Like, how can I help myself? So what I share with people is, think about yourself in a chair and somebody has tied you to the chair and they walk out of the room. And now, if in the very moment you're imprisoned and you start struggling, what's going to happen to those knots?
They get tighter.
They get tighter. And so are you going to be able to get yourself undone? Not as well. Maybe, but not as well. But what if that person walks out of the room and you sit there and you just think about the situation that you're in? And you take several deep breaths and you bring that calm into your nervous system so that you're in a more parasympathetic state. You're in a left brain state. Now, can you notice that, well, wait a minute, my head and my mouth are free. I can just go down here and undo this arm. And now I have my arm. Now I can do this one. And now I can do my feet. and I'm free.
Mm.
That's the kind of thing that I introduce so that, because the Zen theory of change, that's ancient, right? So this has been ancestral for us. And so bringing ourselves back to those ancestral tools, those frameworks that worked when we were being chased by lions and bears and tigers, that's where we can go back in to who we really are as human beings and relieve ourselves from the struggle that I think our modern world, and definitely this whole change vibration, has created a very different response.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you're saying that at this point in time because I right now am doing somatic experiencing therapy because in everything I've gone through, really, when I think back to this, probably started around the time my mom died when I was 30 and I'm about to turn 48, and like 18 years of this. Your mom died and you have two babies, and well, that's fine, you're just going to go back to work and you're just going to keep doing all the things. And then I got to this very intense time, and my response was like, I've lived in full shutdown for 18 years, essentially, where it's just like numb, right? I have been numb to everything. Like, this major life thing happens. Oh yeah, okay. This major life thing happens. Okay. We just put our heads down and keep going.
Yep.
So the woman who I'm working with is doing this sort of work. And when you first hear it, it sounds like, seriously, that's what you want me to do? So in a very concrete example, so a lot of my trauma is stored in my mid back.
Okay.
And so for years, it would go into spasm.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, a lot of it was specific to birth trauma that I experienced.
Okay. Your birth or
No, the birth of my children.
the birth of your child? Okay.
Yes, birthing
Okay.
trauma. And so she said to me, when you start hearing, like when you start feeling that from your back, instead of resisting it, right? Because
Mhm.
that's what we're doing. We resist and we try to fix immediately. Instead of resisting it, just let your brain be present and speak to that part of your body and say, hey, you've been working really hard. You've been holding a lot of pain and trauma for 18 years. You do what you need to do right now. Take all the time that you need to process what you're processing, and I will be here for you. And that has completely shifted in a very short amount of time. It doesn't mean that all the pain is gone. Actually, it kind of increased for a little while because I gave space for that part of my body that's been holding all of this pain and grief and trauma for a long time to start releasing it. And so it's been more activated, and I can feel it actually starting to move out. The
Yeah.
way my brain is conceptualizing it is like ripples in a lake,
Mhm.
where I've dropped that stone of letting my body do what it needs to do to be able to actually move that out into this lake that I visualize around myself, vibration field, however it is that you do that for yourself.
Mhm.
And it's been really transformative. So it's completely what you were saying about, instead of resisting what's happening, acknowledging and making space for it to happen. And when we take that resistance away, there's actually space for it to heal itself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because energy is energy, right? So are you going to spend your energy in resistance or are you going to spend your energy in flow?
Yes. Yeah.
But it's interesting because I just jotted down a couple of notes here, yeah, that it keeps bringing us back to flow, keeps bringing us back to what you shared that beautifully with the acceptance and staying out of the resistance. I'll make this very short. So in 2018, I had an incident where I watched somebody get very injured on their horse, and the whole trauma of that incident was what it was. But I woke up in 2019 in January one morning, like any other morning, and I had PTSD. It was diagnosed later on. I didn't wake up and go, I have PTSD, but I felt extremely anxious and I felt completely different. Energetically in my body, I felt completely different. And I for the first while, I questioned this all through 2019 until the fall of 2019, when I got somebody who knew how to do certain work to help with PTSD. I just was looking for the fix. What's wrong? Why can't I fix it? Why can't I bully through it? Why can't I push through it? I've been able to push through things all the time. Well, right?
Mhm.
So what it helped me to do is literally it helped understanding PTSD, understanding this whole process and this whole experience has helped me today deal with all of these vibrational shifts that we are dealing with in a completely different way than I would have done it for, well, what is it now? 7 years ago. That's bizarre that 2018 was 7 years ago, but okay.
Yeah.
So I really feel like when we look at all of these experiences as gifts, as horrible as they may seem in the moment, but they are gifts that we can take with us for future things that are happening, because we're like, again, full circle, things are dynamic, things are going to keep happening. Sorry. That I feel like it empowers us with different skills to be able to then be a little bit more of that steady place for others to maybe be able to lean on. And then definitely for us to be able to move through the experience very differently than we would have in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
And I think that that's a really beautiful place for us to wrap up this conversation, because I think, yeah. So please, in this time, we all are feeling all the things that we happen to be feeling, but that tool of staying present and releasing the resistance and letting things happen in our bodies, I think is a really powerful way of disconnecting, connecting back into ourselves, letting ourselves flow and feel, so that we can continue to dynamically move forward. So thank you, Anke. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wisdom again.
thank you, Lisa. And thank you for having me again. I really love being able to be on these podcasts with you, but I just love your energy and being with you. So thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining me on this week's episode of Transforming 45. I hope you feel inspired, empowered, and ready to embrace every facet of your midlife journey. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. These actions make a world of difference in growing our podcast community. Your support helps us reach much more amazing listeners just like you. And don't forget, please share an episode you love with a friend or with your community. Sharing our stories is what helps our community grow. Keep shining your midlife magic, and I'll catch you next week.
Electricast.